Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for our Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week program. I am Dr. Jessica Hanshaw, Education and Curations Manager with the Holocaust Memorial Museum of San Antonio. We will begin today's presentation with a few words from State Senator Jose Menendez before we introduce our speaker.
Remembrance Week of 2022. I am so pleased to be joining students from across Texas and learning about the Holocaust. I also want to say thank you to the Texas Holocaust Genocide and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission, to the Holocaust Memorial Museum of San Antonio, and to all of the partners who've made these educational resources available to schools across the whole state of Texas. In 2019, State Representative Richard Raymond and I collaborated to pass Senate Bill 1828. The bill calls on the governor of the state to designate a Holocaust Remembrance Week in order to educate students about the Holocaust and inspire a sense of responsibility to recognize and uphold human value that helps prevent future atrocities. The bill passed both the House and Senate unanimously. That tells you how important this effort is to all of us. Senate Bill 1828 was made possible because of the persistence of local upstanders who call themselves the Four Ladies in a Car, because of their frequent trips to Austin on a mission to have a state-designated Holocaust Remembrance Week in Texas. They understand that it is a solemn duty to remember the Holocaust and to foster communities of awareness, care, and kindness. You're going to learn the stories of survivors of the Holocaust and about the upstanders whose compassionate actions saved many lives. You too can be heroes by speaking up whenever you witness injustice around you, or create change by working with your neighbors and local leaders to improve your community. I invite you to continue learning year-round about the heroic acts of upstanding. And just like the Four Ladies in a Car, please reach out to your elected officials in order to make a difference. You're always welcome to reach out to me at 210-733-6604. And I want to thank you for joining me today. And I hope you share everything you learned throughout this observation of the Holocaust Remembrance Week with everyone you meet. Have a great day.
Hi, I'm Lisa Berry. I am the 2018 recipient of the Maxine Cohen Hope for Humanity Educator Award. And today I'm very pleased to introduce to you our speaker, Dr. Alberto Giordano. Alberto Giordano is a professor in the Department of Geography at Texas State University. He served as president of the UCGIS, the University Consortium for Geographic Information Science, in 2018 and 2019, and is a current board member of the organization. In 2019, he was also a Fulbright specialist in the Department of History at the University of Vilnius in Lithuania. Alberto is a founding member of the Holocaust Geographies Collaborative, a network of researchers and scholars interested in bringing geographical approaches, methods, and perspectives to the study of the Holocaust and other genocides. On this topic, he has co-authored works on the geography of the Holocaust in Italy and in Budapest, and on the Armenian Genocide, and has received funding from the National Science Foundation, the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Holocaust Education Foundation, the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the USC Shoah Foundation, and the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure, among others. He's also involved in projects relating to the application of GI science methods and tools to forensic anthropology, most recently concerning migrant deaths at the US-Mexico border. Dr. Albert Giordano.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. Let me just start my presentation today. And I want to thank the Holocaust Memorial Museum of San Antonio for inviting me and the audience for being here with me today. What I want to talk about is, as the title said, selling genocide and witnessing genocide. And as I am a geographer and a cartographer, I teach map design and map making. I will concentrate on images and examples that are mostly maps and representation of place and space and territory. So let me start with basically I will start with defining what genocide is and why do people commit genocide. And then I will look at selling and witnessing genocide from the point of view of the perpetrator and the victim. And I will have some short concluding remarks. If you want to ask questions, you're welcome to put them in the chat, and the staff of the museum will alert me to that. Or and we can also have a few minutes of questions at the end. Let's start. Now, what is genocide? Genocide is defined officially by the United Nations as any of the following acts, and you have them here, committed with intent. Intent is an important part of the definition of genocide. Destroying in whole or in part national, ethnical, racial, or religious group, so religious groups. Now, and this includes killing members, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members, deliberately inflicting condition of life calculated about to bring its physical destruction, imposing measure intended to prevent birth, and transferring children to from one group to another group. Now, that's the official definition. I want to highlight two other aspects to definition of genocide that are especially relevant in the context of the Holocaust. And the first is genocide is conducted by a state. So usually, it is some kind of organized, politically supported execution of policies, basically. The second, which is very, very important in the context of what I want to talk about today, is that the definition of who is the target of genocide, the definition of the group that is targeted by genocide perpetrator is done by the perpetrator. So it is the perpetrator who defines who is the target of genocide. And so that's an important point, and it's especially important for the Holocaust. Now, another thing I want to point out here is that genocide, the Holocaust and genocide, the extermination, which is what is more associated with the Holocaust, is only one of the 7 or 8 stages of genocide, according to Gregory Hampton. And the definition that we just looked at, the extermination, the legal definition, only pertains to the final stage. But in order to commit genocide, genocide does not occur in a vacuum. You have to prepare for it. Okay, so as a state, you have to prepare. And so, in terms of, so these are, at this stage, these are called the early warnings, because you can still do something to stop it, basically. And here is where the role, in the early warnings, is where the role of propaganda is particularly important. Now, let's go quickly through these stages. The stage of classification, and we'll come back to this in a moment, is the definition of the group that is the target. So it's us versus them. They don't belong with us. They are foreigners. They are extraneous to us. The symbolization is when you start, using for example, in the case of the Holocaust, yellow stars is so you can physically identify members of the group. Another one is dehumanization, and we'll spend the example I have for large part about this stage, in which you basically dehumanize, you deny the humanity of another group and describe it as vermin, cockroach, or rats. These three stages are followed by the stages of organization, in which genocide starts being organized. Polarization, and then these stages are actually quite quick. Polarization is the change in the stage in which legislation is introduced, extremists emerge, political moderates are silenced, and things, things like that. Preparation is the last stage before extermination, and so in the Holocaust, for example, Jews were put in ghettos. So that's an example of lists are made, census are made. Where are the Jews? Who are they? Where they live, etc. And then the stage of extermination we have talked about already. And the last stage is a stage of denial. There is, after genocide, there is a stage always of denial. This could include blaming the victim, saying that it didn't happen, and things like that that occurred after the Holocaust and occur also after many other genocides. Now, I want to be a little bit quick here. This is a complicated slide, but I find this fascinating, because one question is, how do ordinary people commit genocide and mass killing? And this is something that it's always a question that always comes up. Why do people do that? Why did the Nazi, the average German could become a guard at a concentration camp or kill thousands or hundreds of thousands of people? Now, I want to concentrate here on this, on the psychological construction of the other, which is where propaganda is most effective. And here, the idea is that you start, and it's connected to what I just talked about, us versus them. Okay, they are not us, they are different, they don't belong. Moral disengagement is the stage in which you dehumanize. You don't see them as humans, and you disengage morally, from the act that you are committing and the people you are targeting. And then it's blaming the victims. All of these occurred in the Holocaust. Now, let's look at the perpetrator perspective. And here I want to talk a little bit about what is propaganda. Okay, propaganda is a basic misconception is that propaganda consists only of lies and falsehood. In reality, it contains many different kinds of truth: the lie, the half-truth, and the truth out of context. So it's important because propaganda is not only a lie, it can be a half-truth or the truth out of context. And so that's the first concept. The second is propaganda canalizes an already existing stream. Okay, so in the case of the Holocaust, there was a long tradition of anti-Semitism in Europe, dating back at least to medieval times. And so in a land where there is no water, it digs in vain. Okay, so you have to have some fertile ground. Now, this is a quote from Adolf Hitler in Mein Kampf book. And he's talking about to whom should propaganda be addressed. And he makes the case that always and exclusively to the masses, You have to convince your population of accepting Nazism, accepting the Holocaust, etc. All effective propaganda must be limited to a very few points. And that's what the Nazis actually were very effective at doing. And here is, a further quote from Goebbels, which was the minister of propaganda during Nazi Germany. And he's basically saying, you have, it elaborates on this idea of Adolf Hitler. And he says, not only to the people in their totality, so not only to the masses, but you have to be able to talk to parts of those masses, the worker, the peasant, the middle class, in different ways. And again, the Nazis were very, very effective in doing this. Now, very quickly, and then I'll show you, and then I'll stop with talks and show you a lot of images. Now, main elements of Nazi propaganda. Jews threatened the very existence of Germany. So Nazi Germany, the Germans were defending themselves against the threat of the Jew. We already talked about a long history of anti-Semitism in Europe, mostly for religious reasons. And the Nazis made ample use of images and arguments, including the ritual murder of Christian children, which was a trope that was really very hard to let go. Now, one thing that the Nazis were especially especially concerned about sexual relations between Jews and Germans. They wanted the purity of the German blood not to be contaminated by sexual relations at birth of children, for example, with Jews. And so Jews were represented as ugly and violent, intent to corrupt and rape German women. And the other thing is the Nazis saw the Jews as the puppet masters of history behind communism, capitalism, Freemason, democracy. Every concept that the Nazis did not like, they saw the Jews behind that. This is, if you look, this is still with us. I still hear, occasionally, I still hear this in the rhetoric today on social media, etc. And then, again, the dehumanization of the Jew was a key element of Nazi propaganda. Okay, so now let's look at examples. Here I want to point out that we are going to talk about the first 6 stages. Okay, so we're going to look at example from the first 6 stages. And then we look at the 7th stage, in which, Holocaust is actually genocide is actually executed. Here is I have a series of slides here. Here is a medieval image of the murder of children, that their blood is taken. And so, and for ritual purposes. It's one of the many iconographic examples of this. And the people who are around are Jews. You can recognize them, some of them from what they wear. Okay, so that's an example. Now, another example that I want to show, because to me is really chilling, really harbinger of things to come, if you want. The Holocaust was preceded by the Euthanasia program, in which basically the Nazi state eliminated all the undesirable, the physically ill, the mentally ill especially, and the one that were a load on society. And here is, these slides, here it says the cost for the genetically ill, and these are the social consequences. So basically, it's making the point with building a hospital or a place for the genetically ill, for the feeble-minded, in precision, is equivalent to build 17 houses for healthy and working class families. That's what this is. So an example of propaganda for the euthanasia program that is intent to convince the people, to sell the idea to the German. Now, here is example that are more about the Holocaust. The first one here is, the title here is Us versus Them, as we talked about. And here is the Nuremberg law for the protection of blood and German honor. This is from 1935. And basically, this is the definition. Remember, we talked about it. It is the perpetrator who defines the group. This is, this basically is how the Nazi defined you based on, what was your parents and grandparents, if you were a mixed race, mixed Jew and non-Jew, etc., etc. So, and that's what this is representing. And one thing, I told you I was gonna give example mostly with maps. And here you see, this is the boundary of Germany at the time. And notice that here is a wall that separates Germany from the rest. It doesn't. The idea here is we do not want outside elements into Germany. That's an example of propaganda for this. Now, then, I want to show you example of political and racial, a series of examples. Here is because, remember the Jews were not only non-human and ugly and corruptors, but they were also behind the ideology that the Nazis didn't like, including communism, but also capitalism. And so here, the one here is behind. So here is basically showing a iconographic representation of the Jew, the wandering Jew, and behind him is Winston Churchill, the President of England, the Prime Minister of England. Okay, and so basically makes the point that England is an enemy of the Nazis because the Jews are behind that. Now here is on the other end, this is about communism, and you can see here these are leeches, and the leeches are expanding all over Europe, meaning communism is infecting Europe, except for Germany and and the powers that were allied to Germany at this time. So that's an example of political and racial. Now, other example is, these are intended to threaten, to be, monsters, especially the one on the right. And here is actually the spider. It's an image that the Nazis loved. And here is this is actually communism here. Is the monster that is intent of devouring the world. Here is a very interesting one. Here you can see that here is England, is a cemetery. Here is the Nazi that is kicking, is fighting Stalin and the Soviet Union. And it's the countries that were either neutral or allied, or they were not they were not against Germany, or they were controlled by Germany at this time, because this is a 1943 poster. You notice that there is prosperity, there is industry, there is agriculture, there are babies being born, as opposed to England, which is a cemetery. That's an example of this kind of propaganda. Now, and then in many cases, all of these things, political, racial, threatening, all come together. This is not a map, as you can see, but it's a famous, very, very famous poster. And here it basically says England, America, and Russia, and the Soviet Union. Behind them, there is only one person. There is only one group, the Jew. So the Jew are, puppet masters of history, as I talked about earlier. And here is, again, when the Soviet Union became allied with England, basically says, this is Stalin, this is Churchill, and the Jew again is behind them. Okay, so that's an example. Notice the cartographic representation here. This is a militarized, and it's again this idea of a wall that we saw earlier that separates free, Europe controlled by the Nazis, and the Soviet Union and England that are red blood. Now, these are, I'm showing these because it's the same kind of idea, plus, with the disgusting part, but I want to make the case here that this kind of propaganda went well beyond Germany and areas occupied by Germany. And so here are 3 examples. This is a very typical of iconography that we have already seen. Here is the Jew or the communist here, but remember, the Jew is always behind all of these. And here is their spider or other type of animals, the dragons here, and they are intent on controlling the world. And this is in French, this is in Danish, and this is in Romanian. And here, this is called the red spectrum. And here you can see that, that it's, again, attacking everybody and devouring everybody except for the Nazis. And here is Bucharest, the capital of Romania, that are the only ones that stand against them. Now, I have, the Nazis made use of movies also in their propaganda. And here I have 2 movies that I'm not going to show you because we don't have time, and I want to avoid technical issues. And these movies that are available on YouTube, they are in German, but you can kind of get a feeling for how they were filmed cinematographically. But basically, these are both 1940 movies. So this is during the stage of extermination, but still propaganda against the Jew. The first one is a pseudo documentary on Jewish practices, and it's called The Eternal Jew, and basically make them disgusting. What they do, how they butcher animals, etc. It was not a commercial success. So this is the one that flopped, if you want. They were shown in movie theaters in Germany. The second was a huge success. It's a story. It's called Sus the Jew. Sus is this person here, and it's an historical drama set in this 18th century that contains some element of truth. Remember what we talked about earlier, propaganda being the half-truth or the truth out of context, and very, very successful, very successful movie. Notice that in both of these, there is a very strong iconographical Jewish representation. They kind of have the same expression, right? They are evil, basically, both of them. This more evil, and this is more conniving. It's a cunning character. Now, what I want to talk about now is basically how do we go from the propaganda to the carrying out of the extermination. So once you have sold the idea of basically committing genocide, then you actually have to carry it out. Okay, now the Holocaust was unique in several ways. One of the ways that it was unique was the dimension of it. it went all across continental Europe, basically. And it was implemented in different ways in different places. So you might have seen, movies like Schindler's List or others in which there is in which Jews are in ghettos, right? But that was only, Eastern Europe. Western Europe and Southern Europe, the the Holocaust by the Nazis was implemented in different ways. So, for example, in Western and Southern Europe, there were no ghettos. Okay, so because the Jewish population is very different in Western Europe and in Eastern Europe. Eastern European Jews were traditionally more religious. They spoke Yiddish, which is a language that they spoke in Eastern Europe, which is close to German, spoken by the Jews of East Germany, and also many of the Jews that emigrated before the Holocaust to America. In Western and Southern Europe, Jews spoke the language of the country they were citizen of. So in Italy, which is my country of birth, the Jews of Italy spoke Italian. And so the point I want to make is that it is implemented in different ways in different parts of Europe. What you, from a point of view of the cartographic, the maps and these kind of images, you can't carry out the extermination with the examples that we have seen earlier, just because they are not detailed enough. They are not intended to be used as tools for committing genocide materially. They are considered tools for selling genocide to the population. So here is the kind of maps that were produced to carry out the genocide. Here is one that is one of the most famous documents, maps of this time. So this is from circa 1941, and here is basically the SS Einsatz Group A, which is this, early in the genocide, in the Holocaust, instead of building camps for killing Jews, the Nazis went around Eastern Europe, especially here you see the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and then basically killed everybody that they found. And here are two maps. One that is from 1935 that talks about these are the three countries, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, and here are the Jews. Okay, and you can tell there were 4%, and a little bit less here. And here is when we have killed them. Okay, so here is after the the first stage of the Holocaust. This is basically saying we have killed all of the Jews of Estonia, and how many we killed in Lithuania and in Latvia. So this is basically a military report that basically say what we have done. Okay, so here is another one. So this is the Ghetto of Łódź, which is a Polish city. And here, the ghetto did not materially show up in these maps, but it was identified by the fact that the streets where the ghetto did not have names, but only letters. So that's an example of a map that was used to conduct genocide, to organize genocide, organize the Holocaust at the scale of the city. I only have a couple because I want to move on and want to talk a little bit about the victim. Okay, so we talked about selling genocide. Let's talk a little bit about witnessing genocide. Here is one of the best maps ever made, in my opinion. This is a map of 11-year-old Fritz Fraudenheim, and this is before the Holocaust. This is 1938. And here is a boy that was a Jew from a Jewish family, and his family decided to leave Germany. And here is basically the story of his first 13 years of his life. This is where he was born. Then they moved, then they went around, then they moved again. And then basically, and that's their escape from Hamburg to Belgium, to France, to Portugal, to Africa, Brazil, etc. And until they finally arrived to Uruguay, who took them in. What I like especially about this map is that it's both time, okay, and it's also places at different scale. This is Africa, this is a house. And it's very realistic. It's very pictorial, if you want. And look at the train with the power line, etc. So it's a really beautiful map. Now here is an example from 1942, and basically here is a map of the ghetto in Slobodka. And this is a rare example of map that was created at the time by the Jews living in the ghetto. And here is basically talks about where people live and where actions were taken. Actions were the gathering and deportation of Jews or killing of Jews. This is another example of a map. And this was a map of the Theresienstadt ghetto, and this was smuggled out of the ghetto by a Jew who lived there and was able to escape. Notice these are very, very different types of representation. They are more, if you want, this is more a pictorial representation similar to the ones that we have seen at the beginning of the talk. These are more the ones that basically, these are maps that are intended to be used, okay? Just like these maps are intended to be used by the perpetrator to commit genocide, these maps are used by the victim to resist genocide and denounce genocide, if you want. Now, here are a couple of pictorial examples that I like, especially. They are very, there is a lot of this iconography, and there's a lot of, art created by victims, by survivors of the Holocaust. Here is a rare example of a drawing that was done by an inmate at Auschwitz, unknown, while he was in Auschwitz. And here it presents basic, Königsgräben was a canal that was being dug in Auschwitz. And here you can see the guards, the prisoner working. It's very, very vivid representation. And here is one prisoner that has died, and his comrades are, basically taking him, we don't know where. That's an example of created during the Holocaust in Auschwitz. This is another example created after the Holocaust by Johannes Steyer, which was a Jehovah's Witness. And here is an example of, basically, he has a series of drawings that he did after the Holocaust, narrating his experience during the Holocaust, from where he was in Germany, and I was harassed and persecuted up to the end. He was liberated in Buchenwald in 1945. And here is, when they got in, when he first arrived in Buchenwald, they were put to work building barracks. And that's the inside of the camp that you see. And it's very dark, it's there. Outside is light, outside is freedom. And here is the last one that he did, which is the opposite, is outside and is looking in, and these are this is the time in which Buchenwald was liberated in 1945. So there's a lot of these, if you want, impressionistic pictorial representation. Now, I want to point out, I'm almost done. I want to point out also, I don't know if you follow the news, but Maus has been in the news in the past few days. Maus is a graphic novel that was basically first published, I think, in 1973, and it won the Pulitzer Prize. And it was the only comic book that won the Pulitzer Prize. And here is basically the father of the creator narrates his Holocaust experience to his son. And it's just beautifully illustrated. And here you have some examples of it. One thing that he did, it was very clever. He wanted to symbolize, the victims and the perpetrators, victims, perpetrator, and bystanders as animals, instead of, with symbols. And he was very, very clever in doing this. The mice are the Jew, the cats are the Nazis, and the Poles, the bystanders in Poland, are pigs. And one thing that is especially clever, if you have a chance to read this, is that these are Jews that are, pretending to be Christian to try to escape, and that's how we represented them. I think it's very, very clever. Now, we have talked about two movies at the beginning. These are two that are, really nasty movies. And here are two recent movies, both of them Hungarian. And if you have a chance, watch them. They are among the best movies, especially for the very geographic perspective. The Son of Saul, they won the Festival of Cannes, the movie Festival of Cannes, is the story of an inmate, of a prisoner in Auschwitz, and is shot from the point of view of his what he could see. So it's very, very close quarters. This one is another story that is very important in the Holocaust, and it is the return. And these are two Jews that go back to their home, their little village in Hungary, and what they find. So they're both very, very nice, very, very interesting movies if you have a chance. The one on the Son of Saul is quite hard to watch, and so, but the other is not. Now, concluding remarks. Basically, what I want to talk about here very, very quickly is the role of propaganda. White, black, and gray. White propaganda. I'll come back in a moment. And then, I would like to actually pass these concept that you can use propaganda to commit genocide, but you can also use propaganda for resisting, documenting, and denouncing genocide, and for preventing it. Okay, so we have seen the different stages of genocide and the discourse that is around them. And my point here is that same principles can be applied to counteract. So it is up to us to identify the stages of genocide and, in order to prevent them. And the thing that is especially important to me is avoid the us versus them. That is, I think, a cancer to the community in which we live. So the us versus them is the very first stage of genocide. Now, to know more, a lot of these images that I show today are from a website called germanpropaganda.org, which is really interesting. And many others and some others that are shown are from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, which has a wonderful teaching and training wing, if you want. And that's all for today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Giordano. We appreciate you being here with us today.
Thanks. I don't know if there are any questions or.
Yes, we have a couple minutes. If we have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or we have the Q&A box open as well. Let's see if we have anything come through. Okay, while we're waiting to see if any questions come through, I do want to take a moment just to thank our sponsors for their generous contributions to our programming this week, including the Texas Holocaust, Genocide, and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission. We'd also like to thank our viewers for being with us today. You can learn more information about Texas Holocaust Remembrance Week and view any of our programming from the week at humsa.org/THRW. And we also ask that you consider filling out the post-event survey on our website after viewing this presentation. So I don't see any questions, but again, we thank Dr. Giordano for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you for your attention. To our viewers.
Thank you for your attention.